Thank you, Cynthia. Good morning. It's an honor to be here today for the release of the 13th edition of the Labor Department's findings on the worst forms of child labor. I want to thank my colleague and friend Carol Peer, who's our Deputy Undersecretary, and her wonderful team for their great work on this very, very important report. Marcia Eugenio is to my left, and Charita Castro to my left, who are two people who have been very involved in the very important work in this area. Our Bureau of International Labor Affairs, ILAB, may be small in terms of the numbers of employees, but as we say in the business, they punch well above their weight. They do critical work, and as a result of ILAB, the Labor Department is an important player in the global discussion on international labor issues, including but not limited to child labor and forced labor. By working to improve workers' rights around the world, we help reduce inequality, promoting broad-based and inclusive economic growth. And our international work, which is a priority at the Labor Department, has a major impact here at home because strong labor rights around the world create a level playing field that ensures that American workers get a fairer shake and greater access to opportunity. So much of our international work is indeed focused on protecting the rights of the most vulnerable. And that's what this report, mandated by the Trade and Development Act of 2000, is all about. It helps us to understand the worst forms of child labor in over 140 countries and territories, places that benefit from U.S. trade preferences. And the report also analyzes the efforts those countries are making to address the challenges. This report shines a light on children around the globe who are being robbed of their futures, who spend their days and often nights engaged in some of the most grueling work imaginable. I'm talking about children who carry huge loads on their back and wield machetes on farms, children who scavenge in garbage dumps and crawl in underground mine shafts searching for precious minerals from which someone else will profit, children who suffer verbal and physical sexual abuse as domestic workers, children with munitions strapped to their bodies, pressed into service as combatants in armed conflicts, children who are victims of trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. There are at least 168 million of them worldwide. Think about what a staggering figure that is, equivalent to the entire population of Australia, Germany, and the UK. That's 1 out of every 10 children waking up each day not to sit in a classroom with a book and a teacher and a sense of optimism, but preparing to do some of the most dangerous jobs there are. And of this 168 million, the ILO estimates that 85 million participate in hazardous labor, and 6 million are forced into labor or sexual exploitation. That is not who we are as a global community. It shocks the conscience. It's a violation of basic human dignity, and it also stifles growth and keeps nations from realizing their potential. The short-sighted approach is to put children at work as a means of accelerating output and production. But in the long run, when children are learning rather than working, that's when economies grow and nations prosper, and families and communities prosper as well. Globally, there is good news. Over the past 15 years, we have seen remarkable progress. From 2000 to 2012, the number of children engaged in child labor decreased by 78 million. 78 million. We are seeing more countries make a serious commitment to addressing this issue. The report provides a scorecard that tracks the progress countries are making from one year to the next. Nearly 60% of the countries covered in this report made moderate to significant advancement in their efforts to eliminate the worst forms of child labor in 2013. Still, the remaining 40%, which is 59 other countries, made minimal to no advancement. The 13 countries who made significant advancement come from around the globe: Albania, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Cote d'Ivoire, Ecuador, El Salvador, Peru, Philippines, South Africa, Tunisia, and Uganda. I applaud the efforts of these 13 countries, and when you look at the geographic dispersion of these countries, indeed it tells you that in every corner of the globe, it is possible to make dramatic progress in eliminating forms of child labor through leadership, through partnership, through the development of a plan, and through persistence. And so this report provides tools for countries to tackle this challenge with a renewed sense of urgency. It suggests concrete steps and changes in the law that countries and governments can take. For example, in many countries, better social protection programs and access to schooling would help vulnerable children and their households, and the report identifies those gaps and recommends improvements. Child labor has its roots, as you know, in serious and deeply rooted social problems. Poverty, discrimination, civil unrest, these all make children more vulnerable to forced labor. The report also identifies these challenges and recommends a number of possible solutions. In almost all cases, parents send their children to work not because they want to, but because they have to. It's the only option because there is no other viable path forward. Child labor is very often a choice made out of necessity as families tragically compromise more idealistic hopes and dreams. So helping countries address these underlying root causes of child labor can help parents, families, and communities get a better choice and indeed a brighter future. So for instance, a recent World Bank report underscored the importance of conditional cash transfer programs. It demonstrated that even a little bit of money can go a long way toward increasing school attendance and reducing child labor. Promoting worker rights is also critical. Parents who can find and retain good jobs are better able to break the cycle of poverty, and this in turn contributes to reductions in child labor. As we move forward with these efforts, we owe an enormous debt of gratitude to one person who couldn't be here today. And this person has been there for literally decades as a stalwart in the struggle for children's rights, for labor rights, and for human rights. And that is my friend, mentor, and frankly, hero, Tom Harkin. Senator Harkin is someone whose leadership we will sorely miss. His working with his Capitol Hill allies, he has shone a light on so many issues involving vulnerable children and vulnerable communities in America and indeed around the world. I recall recently an event we did at the Department of Labor with Congressman Engel and Senator Harkin that highlighted the progress that was being made in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire toward the elimination of child labor in the cocoa industry, a remarkable example of partnership in action. Senator Harkin has put his values into action every single day. We applaud his leadership, and as you know, he drafted the legislation that mandates this report. And as he has said, the aim of this report is not punitive, but rather to jumpstart individual and collective action. I can't emphasize that enough. This is not a gotcha exercise. This is an exercise about making sure we can make progress. My sincere hope is that we do not take this book home and use it as a doorstop. We do not simply put this on the reference books next to the old encyclopedias that are gathering dust and causing asthma and not being used and collecting cobwebs. More than ever, this book provides a roadmap for progress. And we have seen how countries have taken this book and taken the recommendations, and NGOs have taken the recommendations, and media has shown a spotlight on the report and the recommendations, and it indeed becomes a catalyst for action and an instrument for change. That is our goal in this report, not only this year, but every year. Our goal is to bring this report to life through direct policy engagement with other countries, by supporting international projects that facilitate the suggested actions in this report, by creating positive change for children and families on the ground. And in this spirit, I am pleased to highlight some new grants that we hope will do just that. These grants move our research into action and address recommendations in the report. We have awarded $7 million to Windrock International to implement a global project known as Country-Level Engagement and Assistance to Reduce Child Labor, or CLEAR 2. CLEAR 2, among other goals, will provide direct assistance to governments, including Nepal and Burkina Faso, that want to improve their capacity to reduce child labor. By the end of this year, we are also planning to fund projects to combat child labor, promote worker rights, and safer worker conditions in Ethiopia, Honduras, Vietnam, Uzbekistan, among other countries. We will be funding impact evaluations to help develop the knowledge base on the most effective tools for combating child labor. We will be dedicating funds to advance our ability to monitor our projects so that we know they are achieving real results. And we know we could not do this without NGO partners in America and around the world. And we applaud the efforts and the commitment and the zeal with which our NGO partners approach their work. And we cannot say thank you often enough for the work that you do. You know, as a parent of three, it's impossible to separate this report and this work, and it's impossible for me on a personal level to review this report without reflecting on the fact that I am the parent of three kids, 18, 15, and 12 years old. Because, you know, when you watch your children grow up, and my oldest child just left for college a couple months ago, and you see the opportunities they have had, I can't help in reviewing this report but reflect on the fact that it is simply and grossly unfair that my children have access to opportunities that hundreds of millions of other children around the world do not. And I dream a world in which every child has access to realize their highest and best dreams. Childhood is really supposed to be about a sense of wonder, adventure, and possibility. And through my former work at the Department of Justice, when we were doing human trafficking cases, I met so many children for whom those dreams were simply not the reality. And that's why when I read this report and I see the work that you have been doing, my colleagues have been doing at iLab, when I see the work that NGOs are doing here in America and around the globe on the issues of child labor, I am in awe of what is done, but I am sobered by the fact that while we are making progress, we have a lot of work to do, because every page of this report tells a story about children without childhoods, exploited for their labor instead of given the chance to grow and learn. Through this report, we give voice to these voiceless children, and we assume responsibility as a global community for doing something about this scourge. Because child labor is indeed a human rights problem, and if you want to look at it more pragmatically, it is a gross misallocation of human capital. It has a disastrous effect on global economic growth and development. And eradicating child labor, as we all know, requires an all-hands-on-deck approach, an all-of-the-above and then some strategy with governments, labor unions, industry leaders, business organizations, NGOs, international, civil society. Everybody has something to offer in this effort, and all of you in the media play such an indispensable role in raising awareness, because there are still some folks who believe that this is part of the history books, and I want it to be part of the history books. But as this report highlights, it is still a reality across the globe for too many children. So some may say child labor, you know, is a fact of life. It's intractable. It's structural. It's something we have to just simply expect in the global economy in which we live. Well, I categorically reject those statements, and I know President Obama and other world leaders refuse to accept that. I refuse to throw up my hands in the air and walk away from this moral imperative, this economic imperative, this security imperative. And through this report, we think that we can take the next steps to bring about meaningful, lasting change that ensures a future of hope for children around the world. Everybody should be able to realize their highest and best dreams. And that is what our aims are. That's what this report seeks to outline. And I'm honored to be here today to announce its release. We have a lot of work to do, and we will continue that work together with the global community. And with that, let me turn it over to my colleagues, Marcia and Charita. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Peres. Thank you.
Good morning. I too am honored to be here today to provide you more information about how to read a country profile from our 2013 Findings of the Worst Forms of Child Labor report. For my colleagues and me, this report is about more than simply fulfilling a congressional mandate. As the Secretary has said, this is about giving a voice to the voiceless. Sorry, as you can see, the Secretary and I have a height differential. Before I begin, I would just like to get a sense of how many of you in the room have read previous versions of our report. How many of the journalists in the room have read previous versions of the report? Raise your hand. Okay, so I see that there's a first-time user and first-time users and some veteran users. Well, regardless if you've read the report or you're just reading it for the first time, I think everyone in this room is in for a treat. It's not Halloween, but this year we are excited to introduce a new format for presenting the status of country's efforts. What you will find is an improved design that makes the country profiles a more user-friendly document and a better tool for policy engagement. Key information is presented in a streamlined manner using more tables and less text than in previous years. If it sounds like I'm trying to sell you something, I am. The good news, it's free. We want you to be able to use this, and we also want those of you who have taken your time to be here to also be a voice for the voiceless. So that you can become more familiar with the report and understand why it's so big, I would like to walk you through contents of a country profile. Each country profile is broken down into 4 parts. These parts include a country overview, a section that describes where children are working, an analysis of country efforts by key areas, and suggested actions to address the problem. In assessing whether a country has made an advancement to address child labor, we look at 5 areas. These areas include legal framework, enforcement of laws, coordination of government efforts, government policies, and social programs. So for those of you who have a report, I'd like to provide you a little more detail on the country profiles, and if you can turn your page to 171. We'll use Chile as an example, and you can follow along with me. For those of you who don't have a report, I'll simply walk you through, so it's okay. As you can see on the top of page 171, each country profile begins with an overview of 2013 in a single paragraph. This is essentially a thumbnail sketch, or if you will, an executive summary for the country profile. It includes an assessment level assigned to the country for this year, a summary of key findings, including highlights and gaps in country efforts, and notes the most common or egregious forms of child labor found in the country. Countries can be assigned a significant, moderate, minimal, or no advancement. You can see that Chile, for those of you looking at the report on the top of the page, made a significant advancement. So section 1, and you can look further down on the page, provides a comprehensive picture of the worst forms of child labor in the country. It begins with a review of available data on working children and school attendance, followed by a presentation of sectors and activities in which children are found working. And the Secretary mentioned these in his remarks. Just to let you know, they're broken up into 4 categories, and these categories are agriculture, industry, services, and the last category, which is understood as the worst forms of child labor, referred to in the report as the categorical worst forms of child labor. Agriculture includes children who are involved in dangerous farm work, such as spraying pesticides on cocoa farms, wielding machetes to cut sugarcane, and working long hours to harvest cotton. Industry includes children who are involved in manufacturing or construction. These activities include weaving carpets and quarrying stones. Services include children working as domestic workers and also those children who work on the streets scavenging garbage. Finally, the last grouping of work, categorical worst forms of child labor, refers to children who are in bonded labor or slave-like conditions, such as children in armed conflict, and also those children used in illicit activities, such as drug trafficking, and those children who are trafficked for labor or commercial sexual exploitation. Section 2 on page 172 describes and assesses the adequacy of a country's legal framework on child labor. It begins with a table that lists the country's ratification of key international conventions. This includes International Labor Organization conventions, UN optional protocols on the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and the Palermo Protocol on Trafficking. The section then lists a set of standards that should be established through national legislation in order to protect children from exploitative labor. It includes the establishment of minimum ages for general work and hazardous work, and prohibition against dangerous jobs. The section then ends with a discussion of any relevant laws the government has passed or failed to pass during the reporting period. Section 3 describes the role of government agencies in enforcing laws related to child labor and reports on whether investigations or allegations were made during the reporting period. Basically, is the country enforcing the laws it has on the books to protect children? Section 4 provides information on institutions charged with coordinating overall efforts to combat child labor in the country. We want to know, is the left hand speaking to the right hand? If the Ministry of Labor finds a child working, is there a mechanism to refer that child and his or her family to the Ministry of Social Welfare so that they can be provided with appropriate services? Section 5 provides information on whether a country has a comprehensive policy for the elimination of the worst forms of child labor. For our report, a policy on child labor is defined as a framework that lays out general principles intended to guide a government's actions on child labor. We are also looking at whether child labor as an issue has been integrated into a country's overall development or education policies. Section 6 reviews whether social programs exist in the country to prevent or remove children from the worst forms of child labor. As you can see, for those of you looking on page 76, Chile has a number of social programs to address child labor. These include cash transfers to families in extreme poverty to assist with education expenses for children. Last but not least, each country profile concludes with a set of suggested actions. These suggested actions serve as a roadmap of efforts that individual countries can follow to more fully address the issue. It's important to note that these suggestions are not about telling governments what to do. On the contrary, the goal of our office is to work cooperatively and directly with governments so that these suggestions can become a reality for improving the lives of children. Thanks to my colleagues sitting in this room, we take this process that I've just outlined and do it all again for 143 countries. And that is why this report is so thick and heavy. But please take one on your way out, because it's a good desk reference. So we thank you for being here and listening. At this time, I would like to now turn the podium over to our Deputy Undersecretary for International Affairs, Carol Pierre, to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Just to remind, I'm going to open the floor to questions at this point. I'd like to take the first round of questions from any media that we have in the room, then we can open the floor. Once again, please identify yourself by name and outlet, and wait for the mic. And do we have any questions then? Media first. We'll go here to the front row, and then we'll go to the middle.
Hi, thank you for doing this. I'm Yuan Zhang from Caixin Media. Could you talk a little bit about the child labor situation and cases in China, because I didn't find it in the country profile. And it is reported that Samsung Electronics halted business relationships with Chinese company in Guangdong over the concerns about hiring child labor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. I think it's important to underscore that although this report documents the efforts of roughly 143 countries to eradicate the worst forms of child labor, we do attempt to address child labor in other countries around the world. This is a priority for the Bureau of International Labor Affairs at the Department of Labor. You heard it's a priority for the Secretary. The reason that these countries that you see in this report are selected for evaluation is because these are the countries that are the beneficiaries of unilateral trade preference programs of the United States when those preference programs are in fact in force. So you will see the analysis of these countries' efforts because that is part of the commitment that they must uphold in order to receive these trade benefits. But you will not see, as I said, the efforts of other countries who are not part of that program. But that is not to say that as a bureau, as a department, as an administration, that we don't take these issues very seriously around the world. We do.
We'll go to the question in the middle here.
Hi, thank you. I'm Lucia Leal with FN News. I have two questions. First, you talked about the report being mandated by law. I wanted to know if it's linked to binding restrictions on tariff preference, for example, or if it's just information to Congress for its legislation. And also on Latin America, I saw that there's no advancement in Venezuela and minimal advancement in Uruguay, Dominican Republic, and Haiti. I was wondering if there's any particular worries that you had.
Sure, thank you for your questions. I'll take the first one first. With respect to the legislative mandate as part of the Trade Development Act of 2002, and that of 2000, and that law tasks the Department of Labor with assessing countries' efforts to uphold their commitments with respect to the elimination of worst forms of child labor. That is one of the requirements of the Trade Preference Program, but this is an information providing exercise. This is not, as the Secretary said, a punitive report. The report is intended to provide information, to provide a roadmap for change, to be a catalyst for action. The ultimate determinations with respect to who does or does not get trade preferences lies with the President. So this is simply an information providing exercise that we hope will result in real change on the ground as a result of the assessments that we do and the recommended actions that we outline. With respect to the countries that received minimal or no advancement, there are some, as you identified, in Latin America, and there obviously are others around the world. The way that we determine whether or not a country has made advancements is by looking at the efforts that they have, in which they have engaged in the reporting period, measuring them from the baseline of the prior year and the recommendations that we have made beginning several years ago when we started making recommendations in 2009 as to what countries can do to address the problems identified. So in each of the different cases that you identified, there are particular concerns, particular shortcomings. Sometimes it's a question of a law that curbed efforts to eradicate the worst forms of child labor was not in conformity with international standards. Sometimes it's a policy, sometimes it's a walking back of social programs. So in each case, we look at the particular circumstances and make the determination.
Question here in the front.
I'm with Associated Press, I'm sorry. What kind of feedback are you getting from the countries? Do some push back, or do the worst offenders ignore you, or what does it look like?
That's a very good question. I think it's a very good question because, as the Secretary said, and as we have said, our ultimate goal is to use this as a tool for change. And one of the best ways to realize change is when you have a partner that is interested in also making that change. I think there is no one answer to your question. There are some countries that push back. There are other countries that look at the recommendations and the assessment and say, we have the same goal that you do. We have the same goal to which we have committed under ILO Convention 182 and in the context of U.S. trade preference programs. We want to address the situation. Work with us. Can you provide us technical assistance? Can you help us? So the reaction, it runs the spectrum. So there's not, one single answer to your question. And as the Secretary highlighted, one of the grants that we are announcing, the $7 million Clear 2 project, is precisely to have a pot of money available for those countries that do want help in implementing the recommendations in this report. So that money is intended to provide that kind of assistance for those countries who say, we want to try to solve this problem.
I could open the floor to additional questions, perhaps from non-media if there might be one. Back in the middle. We'll see which microphone gets there first.
Hi, Carol. This year, Bolivia lowered the age of work to 10 for some children. I was wondering if that resulted in a downgrade of their status.
Yeah.
What organization you are?
Reed Mackey with the Child Labor Coalition.
No, thank you so much for your question, and thank you so much for all you and the entire coalition does in the efforts to eliminate the worst forms of child labor. As the Secretary mentioned, our civil society partners are critical to this effort, so thank you. The very technical answer to your question is that that lowering of the minimum age happened after the reporting period. So the reporting period is the calendar year, and then significant efforts, or progress, significant efforts that countries might make in the first quarter, or significant backtracking, depending on the instance. But that change was after the reporting period. But that said, that is one part of the child labor story in Bolivia. Bolivia is continuing to make other efforts to try to address the problem of the worst forms of child labor. We have had projects in the past with Bolivia where we have provided successfully educational opportunities, vocational training, skills building for children and youth that have resulted in the reduction of child labor in the country. So that unfortunate reduction in the minimum age, is not the whole story with respect to Bolivia.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. Should there be additional from the floor? Anybody else? Okay. I think then we'll move on. Close this briefing. We are officially off the record at this point. I want to thank everybody for coming, particularly the Deputy Undersecretary and Secretary Perez for being here. Very important issue, and we're happy to be discussing it. Officially closed. Thank you.